Welcome back to Faithful Tales. Before we jump into today's incredible story, if these sacred tales inspire you, please like, comment, and subscribe, and help me reach 1,000 faithful followers by December. Your support keeps these amazing stories coming. Now let's discover today's tale of faith. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to physically wrestle with God? Not in prayer, not in your mind, but to actually grapple with the divine in the darkness, flesh against flesh, strength against strength, until one of you breaks. 4,000 years ago, a man did exactly that. His name was Jacob. And when the sun rose on that battlefield by the river, he had a dislocated hip, a new name, and a blessing that would echo through every generation of human history. But the wrestling match wasn't the beginning. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent grasping, deceiving, running. To understand what happened that night requires us to go back to the very moment of his birth, when he came into the world clutching his brother's heel, refusing to let go. This is the story of the deceiver who became Israel, the thief who became a patriarch, the broken man who became the father of a nation, and the wrestler who discovered that losing to God is the only way to truly win. Canaan, 1,800 years before Christ. The land was harsh and beautiful, a place where covenant and consequence walked hand in hand. In the tents of Isaac, son of Abraham, a crisis was unfolding. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, had been barren for 20 years. But Isaac prayed, and the Lord answered. Rebekah conceived. But this was no ordinary pregnancy. The babies fought inside her womb with such violence that Rebekah thought she might die. The struggle was so intense, so unnatural, that she went to inquire of the Lord. Why is this happening to me? What does this mean? God's answer was a prophecy that would shatter the ancient world's understanding of birthright and blessing, of order and inheritance, of who deserves what and why. 2 nations are in your womb, he told her. 2 peoples will be separated from within you. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Stop and consider what this meant. In the ancient Near East, the firstborn son inherited everything: double portion of wealth, leadership of the family, the father's blessing, the spiritual authority to carry on the covenant. Birth order determined destiny. And God had just announced he was reversing it. Before these children took their first breath, before they had done anything good or evil, God had already chosen the younger over the older. This wasn't about merit, it was about grace, about divine election, about God's sovereign right to choose whom he will for his purposes. When labor finally came, the first baby emerged red all over, his body covered with hair like a garment. They named him Esau, which means hairy or rough. He came into the world fully himself, bold and immediate. But his brother came immediately after, and his tiny hand was wrapped around Esau's heel, as if he were trying to pull him back, to steal the position of firstborn, to take what belonged to another. They named him Jacob, the heel grabber, the supplanter, the one who trips up, the deceiver. From his first moment of life, Jacob was reaching for something that wasn't his. That grasping hand tells you everything you need to know about Jacob. It was prophecy and personality combined. He would spend the next 7 decades of his life reaching, grasping, manipulating, trying to secure by cunning what God had already promised by grace. The boys grew, and they could not have been more different. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man who loved the open country, the thrill of the chase, the immediacy of the physical world. He was impulsive, governed by appetites, living for the moment. His body was covered with red hair, his arms strong from drawing the bow, his hands calloused from the wilderness. Isaac loved him, perhaps because Esau brought him wild game to eat, perhaps because Esau represented the kind of man Isaac wished he could have been. But Jacob was different, smooth-skinned where Esau was hairy, thoughtful where Esau was impulsive, domestic where Esau was wild. He stayed among the tents, watching, listening, calculating. He understood people in ways Esau never could. He saw the angles, the opportunities, the leverage points where a clever word or a timely action could shift everything in his favor. And Rebekah loved him, perhaps because she remembered God's prophecy. Perhaps because she saw in Jacob's calculating intelligence something that Esau's raw physicality lacked. Perhaps because she recognized in her younger son the one God had chosen. But love, when it becomes favoritism, poisons everything it touches. One afternoon, Esau stumbled in from an unsuccessful hunt. He'd been out for days, chasing game through the wilderness, and he'd found nothing. He was weak, lightheaded with hunger, his body screaming for food. Jacob was cooking red lentil stew, and the aroma filled the camp. It was rich and savory, seasoned perfectly, and to Esau in his famished state, it smelled like salvation itself. "Let me eat some of that red stuff," Esau demanded, his voice hoarse. "Quick, I'm dying here." Jacob looked up from his cooking pot. In that moment, his mind worked rapidly, seeing the opportunity laid before him like a gift. His brother, desperate and hungry, completely focused on the immediate need. And Jacob had something Esau wanted. "First, sell me your birthright." The words hung in the air between them. The birthright. In their world, this meant everything. A double portion of the inheritance. Leadership of the family when Isaac died. The covenant blessing passed down from Abraham through Isaac. The spiritual authority to lead God's chosen people into the future God had promised them. And Esau, his stomach cramping with hunger, his judgment clouded by immediate physical need, said the words that would define him forever. "Look, I'm about to die anyway. What good is a birthright to me?" Think about that response. It reveals everything about Esau's character. He couldn't see past the moment, couldn't conceive of a future beyond his present discomfort. The birthright, with all its spiritual and material significance, meant nothing to him compared to the immediate relief of food in his belly. So he swore an oath, legally transferring his birthright to Jacob. Then he ate the stew, drank some water, got up, and left. The Bible adds one devastating line. Thus, Esau despised his birthright. The writer of Hebrews would later call Esau godless for this moment, not because he was actively evil, but because he valued the temporal over the eternal, the physical over the spiritual, the immediate over the future. He couldn't see past his appetites long enough to value what truly mattered. But Jacob had just purchased the throne of a nation for the price of a bowl of soup. The deceiver's work had begun, and he was just getting started. Years passed. Isaac grew old, and the years were not kind to him. His body weakened. His mind remained sharp. But his eyes dimmed slowly until he was completely blind, dependent on his other senses to navigate the world. He had to rely on voices, on touch, on the sound of footsteps to know who was near him. One day, feeling the approach of death like a shadow at his back, Isaac called for his oldest son. He had something important to do before he died, and he couldn't wait any longer. "Esau, my son," he said, his voice thin with age. "Here I am, father." "I'm old now," Isaac said. "I don't know the day of my death. It could come tomorrow. It could come tonight. Take your weapons, your quiver and your bow. Go out into the open country and hunt game for me. Bring it back and prepare the kind of savory food I love. I will eat it, and then I will give you my blessing before I die." The blessing. The formal, public, irrevocable blessing that would transfer Isaac's authority, his wealth, his covenant relationship with God to his firstborn son. Once spoken, it could not be taken back. It would be legally and spiritually binding. Esau took his bow and went out to hunt, his heart full of anticipation. Finally, the birthright might be gone, but he would have the blessing. Finally, his father's favor would be spoken over him in a way that could never be revoked. But Rebekah was listening from outside the tent. She had lived with God's prophecy for decades. The older will serve the younger. She'd held those words in her heart through all the years of watching Isaac favor Esau, of seeing her younger son overlooked, of wondering if God's promise would somehow be thwarted by Isaac's preference for his older son. Now, with Isaac preparing to bless Esau, she saw that prophecy slipping away. The moment was here, and if she didn't act, Esau would receive the blessing and God's word would seem to fail. So Rebekah made a choice that would fracture her family forever. She decided to force God's hand, She decided that the end justified the means. She decided to make God's promise happen through human deception. She found Jacob among the tents and laid out her plan with urgent precision. "Listen carefully, my son. I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau. He told him to bring game and prepare food so he can bless him before he dies. Now listen to me and do exactly as I tell you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats. I'll prepare them just the way your father likes. Then you'll take the food to him, and he'll bless you instead of Esau." Jacob hesitated, but not for the reason you might expect. He didn't object to deceiving his blind, dying father. He didn't express moral outrage at the thought of impersonating his brother to steal a blessing. His objection was purely practical. "Mother, Esau is a hairy man, and I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? He'll realize I'm deceiving him. Then instead of a blessing, I'll bring a curse down on myself." Notice what Jacob feared. Not the sin, not the betrayal, not the violation of his father's trust. He was worried about getting caught. His conscience was concerned with consequences, not righteousness. Rebekah's response was chilling in its certainty. "Let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go and get the goats." So they prepared the deception together, mother and son, weaving a lie that would poison their family for generations. Rebekah cooked the goats with her husband's favorite spices and seasonings, preparing them to taste exactly like the wild game Isaac loved. She took Esau's best clothes, the ones that carried the smell of the outdoors, the scent of the fields and the hunt, and dressed Jacob in them. Then she took the skins from the slaughtered goats and wrapped them around Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck, creating the texture of Esau's hairy body. Jacob became a living lie, a walking deception, a son disguised as his brother to steal from a blind father. He took the dish and the bread and went into his father's tent, his heart pounding, wondering if this audacious scheme would actually work. "My father," he said. Isaac's head turned toward the voice, his sightless eyes searching the darkness that was now his permanent home. "Yes, my son. Which one are you?" And here, Jacob crossed a line from which there would be no easy return. He spoke the lie directly, clearly, without hesitation. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac was immediately suspicious. His mind was still sharp, even if his eyes were gone, and something didn't add up. "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" Jacob's second lie was even worse than the first. He didn't just deceive his father, he brought God into the deception, using the Lord's name to cover his treachery. "The Lord your God gave me success," he said smoothly. Isaac wasn't convinced. "Come here," he said, "so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob moved closer, his heart hammering. This was the moment. If the disguise failed, if Isaac saw through the deception, everything would collapse. Isaac's hands reached out, trembling with age, searching his son's face, his arms, his neck. The old man's fingers traced the goatskins, feeling the texture, trying to reconcile what his senses told him with what his intuition whispered. "The voice is the voice of Jacob," Isaac muttered, almost to himself. "But the hands are the hands of Esau." He asked one more time, giving Jacob one more chance to tell the truth. "Are you really my son Esau?" "I am." 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words to seal the theft. Isaac ate the food. He drank the wine. And then, satisfied, he called Jacob close to kiss him. As Jacob leaned in, Isaac smelled the smell of Esau's clothes, the scent of the outdoors, and any remaining doubt evaporated. And then Isaac spoke the blessing. Listen to the words carefully, because they contain the future of nations. "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." It was done. The blessing was spoken. And in the ancient world, once a father's blessing was pronounced, it was irrevocable. It carried legal weight. spiritual authority, the force of covenant. Jacob left his father's tent with everything he'd ever wanted. The birthright he'd bought for a bowl of stew, the blessing he'd stolen through deception, the future he'd manipulated into his hands. He'd barely disappeared when Esau returned from his hunt. Esau had been successful. He'd tracked down game, killed it, prepared it carefully according to his father's tastes. His heart was full of anticipation as he entered Isaac's tent, carrying the savory dish that would secure his father's blessing. "My father," he said warmly, "sit up and eat some of the game your son has brought you, so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac's voice went hollow. A coldness spread through his chest. "Who are you?" "I'm your son," Esau said, confusion in his voice. "Your firstborn, Esau." The Bible tells us that Isaac trembled violently. The Hebrew word suggests an earthquake, a seismic shock that went through his entire body. He'd been deceived, manipulated, used. His own son had impersonated another son to steal a blessing from a blind father. And the blessing was gone. Irrevocable. Already spoken. Already sealed. "Who was it then?" Isaac asked, his voice shaking. "Who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him. And indeed, he will be blessed." Reality crashed down on Esau like a physical weight. His voice, when it came, was a scream that seemed torn from his chest, a sound of anguish so raw that it echoes across millennia. "Bless me too, my father." But Isaac, still shaking, said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau's response held all the bitterness of a man who'd lost everything. The words came out twisted with rage and recognition. "Isn't he rightly named Jacob, the deceiver, the supplanter? Twice now he's taken from me. He took my birthright, and now he's stolen my blessing." Then his voice broke. "Don't you have any blessing left for me?" Then Esau did something remarkable. This rough hunter, this man of the fields, this warrior who lived by strength, he wept, not quiet tears. The text says, he wept aloud, his voice loud and bitter, grief pouring out of him like blood from a wound. Isaac gave Esau what scraps remained. "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." It wasn't enough, not even close. It was the blessing of a servant, not a son. The blessing of subjugation, not authority. Esau left his father's tent, and his grief curdled into something darker. Hatred, murder, a cold vow that he repeated to himself over and over. "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." He meant it. This wasn't empty rage, it was a solemn vow. As soon as Isaac died, as soon as the mourning period ended, Esau would hunt down his brother and end him. When Rebekah heard of the death threat, she went to Jacob with desperate urgency. Her scheme had succeeded, but the cost was higher than she'd imagined. "Your brother Esau is consoling himself with the plan to kill you. Now then, my son, listen to me. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. When he forgets what you've done to him, I'll send word for you to come back." "A while," she said. She thought it would be weeks, maybe months. She never saw her favorite son again. Jacob fled into the wilderness alone. No servants, no provisions, no protection. Just a man running for his life with a stolen blessing and a conscience that must have screamed at him with every step. Everything he'd schemed for had led to this: exile, loneliness, terror. He had the blessing, but he'd lost his home, his family, his safety. He'd gained everything and lost everything in the same moment. On the first night of his journey, exhausted and afraid, Jacob stopped as the sun set. He was somewhere in the wilderness between Beersheba and Haran, a barren place without comfort or hope. He found a stone, placed it under his head as a pillow, and lay down under the vast canopy of stars. Imagine that moment, the chill of the desert night, the hard ground, the stone beneath his head, the silence broken only by the wind. And Jacob, alone with his guilt, his fear, his stolen blessing, wondering if Esau was already following, already closing the distance with murder in his heart. He slept, and as he slept, he dreamed. A stairway appeared before him, not floating in the air, but firmly planted on the earth where he lay. Yet it stretched upward, impossibly high, reaching all the way to heaven itself. And on this stairway, angels were moving, ascending and descending in an endless rhythm, a constant traffic between earth and heaven. The image is profound. The angels were ascending first, then descending, rising from earth to heaven, carrying the cries and prayers and needs of humanity to God, then descending, bringing God's response, His provision, His presence back down to the broken world below. Heaven and earth connected, the divine and the human in communion. The gap bridged not by human effort, but by God's initiative. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord Himself, and He spoke, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Read those words carefully. God didn't say, "because you've been faithful," or "because you deserve this," or "because you've earned my favor." He simply declared His promises. Unconditional, unearned, overwhelming. This was grace. Pure, undeserved, magnificent grace falling on a deceiver who just destroyed his family. God was choosing to bless Jacob not because of who Jacob was, but because of who God is. Jacob woke suddenly, gasping, his heart pounding. The dream evaporated, but the presence of God lingered like morning mist. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't aware of it. He looked around the barren wilderness with new eyes. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, while the stars were still fading, Jacob took the stone he'd used as a pillow and set it upright as a sacred monument. He poured oil over it, consecrating it, setting it apart as holy. He named the place Bethel, which means house of God. And then Jacob did something that reveals he was still Jacob, still the negotiator, still the calculator trying to make deals even with the divine. He made a vow, but it was conditional, transactional, revealing. If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. If, then. Even after encountering the living God, even after receiving an unconditional promise, Jacob was still negotiating, still trying to control the terms, still operating as if this were a business transaction he could manage. But something had shifted in him, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. For the first time in his life, Jacob had encountered something he couldn't deceive or manipulate. He had met the God who chose him not because of his worthiness, but in spite of his failures, not because of his merit, but because of divine grace. The deceiver had been found by grace, and grace would pursue him for the rest of his life, relentlessly, until it transformed him completely. Jacob continued his journey north, walking for weeks through wilderness and settled lands, always moving toward Haran, toward his mother's family, toward an unknown future. Finally, he arrived in the land of the eastern peoples. He came to a well in an open field, and 3 flocks of sheep were lying near it waiting. The well had a large stone covering its mouth, and it was the custom to wait until all the flocks gathered before rolling the stone away and watering the animals. Jacob approached the shepherds. "Brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him. Is he well?" "Yes, he is," one of the shepherds said. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." Jacob looked up, and there she was. Rachel was coming toward the well with her father's flock. She was a shepherdess, unusual for a woman, but not unheard of in that time and place. And she was beautiful. The Bible describes her as lovely in form and beautiful in appearance. But it was more than physical beauty that struck Jacob in that moment. Something inside him broke open. The man who had always calculated, always schemed, always planned 3 moves ahead, suddenly acted on pure impulse. He went to the well and rolled away the massive stone covering its mouth. This was a stone so heavy it normally required multiple men to move it, but Jacob, in a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, moved it alone. He watered Laban's flock. Then he did something completely uncharacteristic for him. He kissed Rachel. And then he wept aloud. For the first time in Scripture, we see Jacob act with pure emotion. No calculation, no scheme, no ulterior motive, just genuine, overwhelming feeling. He was in love. Jacob told Rachel he was a relative of her father, the son of Rebekah. Rachel ran home to tell Laban, and her father rushed out to meet this nephew he'd never known. Laban embraced Jacob, kissed him, and brought him into his household. After Jacob had stayed with Laban for a month, working alongside him, learning the rhythms of the household and the flocks, Laban called him aside. "Just because you're a relative of mine shouldn't mean you should work for me for nothing. Tell me, what should your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the text tells us she had weak eyes. The Hebrew is unclear whether this means her eyes lacked sparkle or had a defect, or simply weren't considered beautiful by the standards of the time. What's clear is that she was contrasted unfavorably with her younger sister. Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful in appearance, and Jacob had fallen completely, utterly, hopelessly in love with her. His answer to Laban was immediate. "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." 7 years. Think about that. 7 years of labor as a bride price. It was an extraordinary offer, revealing both the depth of his love and his desperation. He had nothing else to offer. No wealth, no flocks, no inheritance he could claim. All he had was his labor and his love. Laban agreed quickly. "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel. And here, the Bible says something remarkable, something that reveals how much Jacob had changed, how much love had transformed the calculating deceiver. But they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. 7 years felt like days. The schemer who'd sold his brother's birthright for a bowl of soup, who couldn't wait even 1 day to steal a blessing, now worked for 7 years, and it seemed like nothing. Love had given him patience. Love had softened something in him that decades of consequences couldn't touch. Finally, after 7 long years of labor, the time was complete. Jacob went to Laban. His voice was direct, even demanding. "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to sleep with her." So Laban threw a wedding feast. He gathered everyone in the area, and they celebrated with food and wine and music. The festivities went on all day, and as the sun set and darkness came, the bride was prepared. She was heavily veiled, as was the custom. Her face was completely covered. And in the darkness of night, by the light of oil lamps and stars, she was brought to Jacob's tent. Jacob consummated the marriage in the darkness, never seeing his bride's face, trusting that the woman in his tent was Rachel, the woman he'd worked 7 years to marry. Morning came. Light streamed through the tent opening. Jacob turned to his new wife, probably smiling, probably speaking her name. Rachel? But the woman beside him wasn't Rachel. It was Leah. In that moment, in that terrible moment of recognition, Jacob learned what it felt like to be deceived. The man who had disguised himself as his brother finally understood what he'd done to Esau. The man who had exploited his father's blindness was now the victim of darkness and veils and his own assumptions. The deceiver had been deceived. He went to Laban, and his fury was volcanic. "What have you done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban's response was calm, almost amused, certainly calculated. It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we'll give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. The older before the younger. Do you hear the echo? The very order Jacob had violated when he stole Esau's blessing was now being used as justification for deceiving him. The pattern he'd broken was now breaking him. God was teaching the deceiver a profound lesson through his own medicine, showing him in visceral terms what his deception had cost others. Jacob agreed. What choice did he have? He was in love with Rachel, hundreds of miles from home, with no other options. So he finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him Rachel as well. Now Jacob had 2 wives, 2 sisters, competing for the love of one man. Leah, the unloved wife who'd been used as a pawn in her father's scheme. Rachel, the beloved wife who had to share her husband with her own sister. And Jacob, caught between them, learning that even love, even getting what you want, comes with consequences you can't foresee. The arrangement was toxic from the beginning. The Bible makes it clear. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and everyone knew it. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, which means, "see a son," saying, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again and gave birth to a second son. She named him Simeon, which means "one who hears," saying, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." Again she conceived and gave birth to a third son. She named him Levi, which means "attached," saying, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." She conceived yet again and gave birth to a fourth son. She named him Judah, which means "praise," saying, "This time I will praise the Lord." 4 sons. 4 names. 4 cries for love from a husband who would never love her the way she desperately needed. Meanwhile, Rachel watched her sister bear child after child, and her own womb remained closed. The pain of her barrenness, combined with the knowledge that she was the loved wife, created a bitter jealousy. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." Jacob's anger flared at her. "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" In her desperation, Rachel did what Sarah had done generations before. She gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Rachel named him Dan, which means "he has vindicated," saying, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son." Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel named him Naphtali, which means "my struggle," saying, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." Leah, seeing that she'd stopped having children, took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah named him Gad, which means "good fortune," saying, "What good fortune." Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah named him Asher, which means "happy," saying, "How happy I am. The women will call me happy." Then, in one of the strangest episodes in the entire story, Leah's son Reuben found some mandrake plants in the fields during wheat harvest and brought them to his mother. Mandrakes were believed to enhance fertility, and Rachel, still desperate for children, asked Leah for some. Leah's response was sharp with years of accumulated pain. "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel, showing how transactional the relationship had become, made an offer. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." That evening, when Jacob came in from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me tonight," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with Leah that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. She named him Issachar, which means reward, saying, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. She named him Zebulun, which means honor, saying, "God has presented me with a precious gift." This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have borne him 6 sons." Later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and she said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph, which means "may he add," saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." 11 sons, 1 daughter, 4 women, 1 household fractured by jealousy, competition, and the consequences of deception and favoritism. Jacob was learning a hard lesson. You cannot build God's promises on human manipulation. You cannot scheme your way to blessing without reaping the bitter fruit of those schemes. The patterns you create will turn back on you in ways you can't predict or control. 20 years passed in Haran, 14 years for his wives, 6 more years building his own wealth. Jacob had learned from Laban. He'd watched his father-in-law's cunning, his manipulation, his willingness to change agreements when it suited him. And Jacob, ever the schemer, found ways to turn that manipulation back on itself. Through clever breeding practices with the flocks, through understanding genetics in ways that seemed almost miraculous for his time, Jacob prospered. His flocks multiplied and grew strong. He acquired servants, camels, donkeys. He became exceedingly wealthy. But Laban's sons began to notice. They started talking among themselves, their resentment growing. Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. The welcome that had greeted him 20 years ago had turned cold. The family bond had soured into suspicion and resentment. Laban looked at him now with calculation rather than affection, always wondering if Jacob was somehow cheating him, somehow taking more than his share. Then the Lord spoke to Jacob. The voice he'd heard at Bethel, the promise he'd received in his dream of the stairway, now called to him again. "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." It was time. Time to stop running. Time to face what he'd left behind. Time to return to the land of promise and confront the brother who'd vowed to kill him. Jacob called Rachel and Leah out to the field where his flocks were, away from Laban's hearing, and told them everything. He described how their father had cheated him, changing his wages 10 times. How Laban had tried every trick to reduce Jacob's share, to keep him poor and dependent. But God had not allowed it. God had watched over Jacob and prospered him despite Laban's schemes. The wives listened, and their response revealed how poisoned the family relationships had become. "Don't we have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate?" Leah asked bitterly. "Doesn't he regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he's used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you." Their loyalty was to Jacob now, not to their father. The family was fractured beyond repair. So Jacob put his children and his wives on camels. He drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he'd accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. He fled without telling Laban, choosing stealth over confrontation, escape over goodbye. But there was a secret Jacob didn't know about. Rachel, without telling her husband, had stolen her father's household gods. These were small idols, teraphim, that represented not just religious devotion, but legal authority and inheritance rights. By taking them, Rachel was making a claim on her father's estate, trying to secure what she felt Laban owed her. It was a theft within a theft, a deception within an escape. The patterns of manipulation and scheming ran deep in this family, passed down like a curse from generation to generation. 3 days passed before Laban discovered they were gone. When he found out, his rage was immediate and intense. He gathered his relatives and pursued Jacob for 7 days, finally catching up with him in the hill country of Gilead. But that night, before Laban could confront Jacob, God came to him in a dream. The voice was clear and carried a warning that could not be ignored. Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. The next morning, Laban caught up with Jacob's camp. His anger was barely controlled, but behind it was the restraint of divine warning. "What have you done?" he demanded. You've deceived me and carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing." Then his voice took on an edge of menace. "I have the power to harm you. But last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.'" His tone shifted to something more personal, more wounded. "Now you have gone off because you longed to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob, not knowing what Rachel had done, responded with the confidence of innocence. "I was afraid, because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Those words, "that person shall not live," they would hang over Rachel like a death sentence, though Jacob didn't know it. He just pronounced judgment on his beloved wife without realizing it. Laban went into Jacob's tent, then into Leah's tent, then into the tents of the 2 female servants. But he found nothing. Then he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle, and she was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So Laban searched but could not find the household gods. Then Jacob's anger erupted. For 20 years, he'd endured Laban's manipulation, his wage changes, his deception. For 20 years, he'd been the subordinate, the employee, the one who had to accept whatever terms Laban dictated. Now, accused of theft he didn't commit, with God's protection evident, Jacob finally stood up to his father-in-law. "What is my crime?" he demanded. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine and let them judge between the 2 of us. I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." Notice what Jacob acknowledged. "If the God of my father had not been with me." For the first time, we hear Jacob truly crediting God for his prosperity, recognizing that his success came not from his own cleverness but from divine protection and provision. The manipulator was learning dependence on God. Laban's response was weak, deflated. "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne?" He was admitting defeat while trying to save face, claiming ownership while acknowledging he had no power to enforce it. "Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He told his relatives to gather stones, and they took stones and piled them in a heap. Then they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha in his Aramaic language. Jacob called it Galid in Hebrew. Both names meant the same thing, witness heap. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." He also called it Mizpah, which means watchtower, saying, "May the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me." They made their covenant, setting the heap of stones as a boundary. "This heap is a witness," Laban declared, "and this pillar is a witness. that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home, and Jacob was finally free from Laban. But ahead of him lay something far more terrifying, something that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. Esau. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He gave them specific instructions about what to say, crafting his message with careful humility. "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord, that I may find favor in your eyes." Notice the language. My lord Esau, your servant Jacob. The man who had stolen the blessing of the firstborn was now prostrating himself linguistically before his brother, acknowledging Esau's superiority, hoping that humility might soften what 20 years of hatred had hardened. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they brought news that made his blood freeze in his veins. "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." 400 men. That's not a family reunion. That's an army. That's a force large enough to wipe out Jacob's entire camp, to slaughter every man, woman, and child, to take revenge for a theft that had festered for 2 decades. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into 2 groups, along with the flocks and herds and camels. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Then Jacob did something he'd never truly done before. He prayed. Not a conditional if-then vow like at Bethel, but a genuine prayer born of desperation and humility and dawning faith. "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper,' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." Listen to those words. I am unworthy. For the first time, we hear true humility from Jacob. For the first time, he acknowledged his absolute dependence on God's grace rather than his own cleverness. The schemer was becoming a man of faith. But Jacob was still Jacob. Prayer was good, but he would also take practical measures. He selected a massive gift for Esau from his flocks: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to, and where are you going, and who owns all these animals in front of you?' then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" He gave similar instructions to the second, the third, and all the others who followed the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, "Your servant Jacob is coming behind us." For he thought, "I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me." So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. That night, unable to sleep, Jacob rose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok River. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions, everything he owned, everyone he loved. He sent them all to the other side of the river. And then Jacob was alone. So Jacob was left alone. Those 5 words carry the weight of his entire life. alone in the darkness, alone with his fear, alone with 20 years of running from his past, alone with a brother who had vowed to kill him, alone with the consequences of all his deception and scheming, alone with the man he'd been and the man he was becoming, alone with God, and a man appeared and wrestled with him till daybreak. The text doesn't explain at first who this man was. It simply says a man wrestled with Jacob through the night. But as the story unfolds, we discover this was no ordinary man. This was God himself in human form, what theologians call a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, the second person of the Trinity taking physical form in the Old Testament. And he wrestled with Jacob. Try to imagine that night. The darkness so complete you can barely see your hand in front of your face, the sound of the Jabbok River rushing over stones, the coolness of the night air, and then a figure emerging from the shadows closing the distance, engaging Jacob in combat. Two figures locked together, grappling, straining, neither giving ground. The physical exhaustion as minutes turned to hours. The sweat despite the cool night. The pain in muscles pushed beyond their limits. The desperate struggle that went on and on as the stars wheeled slowly overhead and the night aged toward dawn. This wasn't a spiritual metaphor. This wasn't a vision or a dream. This was violent, physical, real, flesh against flesh, strength against strength, human will against divine purpose. Jacob had spent his entire life in a different kind of wrestling, wrestling for the birthright with a bowl of soup, wrestling for the blessing with lies and goatskins, wrestling for Rachel through 14 years of labor, wrestling with Laban through wage negotiations and breeding strategies, always grasping, always struggling, always trying to take what he wanted through his own cunning and strength. Now, in the darkness by the river, God gave him the fight he'd been training for all his life. The ultimate wrestling match, the final struggle, human effort confronting divine will. And the remarkable thing is that God let the match continue. Hour after hour, God allowed Jacob to struggle, to exhaust himself, to pour out every ounce of strength and determination he possessed. Why? Because God wanted Jacob to come to the end of himself, to exhaust every human effort, to realize that he could not win, could not manipulate, could not scheme his way to blessing, that his strength, his cleverness, his decades of cunning were ultimately powerless against God. When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that Jacob's hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. One touch. That's all it took. With a single touch, God dislocated Jacob's hip. The socket came out of place. Ligaments tore. The pain must have been excruciating, a lightning bolt of agony that radiated through Jacob's entire body. His strength evaporated in an instant. He could no longer wrestle in his own power. He could barely stand. Every movement sent waves of pain through his leg and hip. But even broken, even crippled, even unable to fight in any conventional sense, Jacob held on. He wrapped his arms around this mysterious figure and refused to let go. He clung with the desperation of a drowning man clutching driftwood. His wrestling had become clinging. His fighting had become holding on for dear life. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching. And the man spoke. "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob, gasping with pain, exhausted beyond measure, wounded and broken, refused. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Think about those words. Think about what they reveal. The heel grabber was grabbing again. But this time, he wasn't grasping for a birthright he could buy for soup. He wasn't reaching for a blessing he could steal with lies. He was clinging to God himself, refusing to let go of the only thing that truly mattered. This was surrender and desperation combined. This was the acknowledgement that he could not take by force what only God could give by grace. This was Jacob, at the end of his strength, at the end of his cleverness, at the end of his ability to manipulate outcomes, simply holding on and begging for a blessing. The man asked a question he already knew the answer to. "What is your name?" God wasn't asking for information. He was asking for confession, for acknowledgement, for Jacob to say out loud who he had been, what he had done, the identity he'd carried for 77 years. Jacob. That whispered name contained everything. Deceiver, supplanter, heel grabber, thief, manipulator, schemer. All the lies, all the tricks, all the running, all the consequences, all the broken relationships, compressed into one broken confession. And then the man spoke with divine authority, with the power to rename, with the prerogative of God to give new identity. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. Israel. The name has been debated by scholars for centuries. It might mean he struggles with God, or God struggles, or prince with God, or one who prevails with God. All of these meanings are present in the Hebrew, layered one on top of another. What's clear is that this was a new name, a new identity, no longer defined by deception but by this desperate wrestling in the darkness, this refusal to let go until the blessing came. Jacob was being transformed from a man who took by cunning into a man who received by clinging to God. Jacob asked, "Please tell me your name." But the man simply replied, "Why do you ask my name?" There's something profound in this refusal. God would not allow Jacob to treat him like someone who could be known, controlled, or manipulated through knowing his name. The mystery remained. The otherness was preserved. Jacob could have a new name, but God's name was beyond his grasp. Then he blessed Jacob there. We're not told the content of the blessing. We don't know what words were spoken. But we know that it happened, that God blessed the man who clung to him, even while broken. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Peniel, face of God. The place where Jacob encountered the divine, not in a dream like at Bethel, but in physical combat, where he wrestled with God and lived to tell about it. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. There it is, the permanent mark, the lasting reminder. For the rest of his life, however many years remained to him, Jacob would walk with that limp. Every step would hurt. Every morning he would wake up and feel the pain in his hip as a reminder of that night by the Jabbok River. Every step would preach a sermon to him. This is what it costs to be transformed. This is what it means to have wrestled with God. This is the price of encountering the divine and being remade. His strength was broken so that God's strength could be revealed. His self-reliance was shattered so that he could learn utter dependence. His ability to manipulate outcomes was crushed so that he could learn to trust God's providence. The deceiver died that night by the Jabbok River. Not literally, but the old Jacob, the schemer, the man who thought he could grab his way to blessing. That man was broken beyond repair. And Israel was born, not through his own effort, not through manipulation or cunning, but through surrender in the darkness, through clinging to God when all his strength was gone, through refusing to let go until the blessing came. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. The moment of truth had arrived. The reckoning he'd been dreading for 20 years was here. His brother, whom he'd wronged so deeply, was approaching with an army at his back. Jacob quickly divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph at the rear. Even now, even after his transformation, his favoritism showed. He arranged his family in order of his affection, protecting those he loved most by putting them farthest back. Then he himself went on ahead of them, bowing down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. 7 times. Complete prostration. The man who had stolen the blessing of the firstborn was now literally in the dust before his brother, acknowledging Esau's superiority, showing complete submission and humility. Every bow must have sent pain shooting through his dislocated hip. Every prostration was agony, but Jacob did it anyway, over and over, until he was close enough to see Esau's face. And then something happened that Jacob never could have predicted, never could have manipulated into existence, never could have schemed his way toward. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him. He threw his arms around Jacob's neck and kissed him. And they both wept. 20 years of hatred dissolved in that embrace. 20 years of murder vows evaporated in those tears. 20 years of estrangement ended in the simple act of two brothers holding each other and crying. God had not only changed Jacob's heart that night by the river, he had transformed Esau's heart as well, working in the older brother over the years to soften his rage, to heal his wounds, to prepare him for this moment of reconciliation. This is grace. Not just God's grace to Jacob, but God's grace reflected in Esau's forgiveness. The image of God shining through in human mercy. When they finally stepped back from each other, Esau looked at the women and children standing behind Jacob. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Listen to those words. The children God has graciously given. Not the children I acquired. Not the children I earned through 14 years of labor. The children God has graciously given. Israel was learning to credit God for everything. The female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Then Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau looked at all the livestock that had been sent ahead. "What do you mean by all these droves I met?" Jacob replied, "To find favor in your eyes, my lord?" But Esau, his voice warm with genuine affection, said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." My brother, not my enemy, not the one who wronged me. My brother. But Jacob insisted, his words revealing how deeply the morning's wrestling match and this afternoon's reconciliation had affected him. "No, please," he said. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. To see your face is like seeing the face of God." Just hours earlier, Jacob had seen God face to face at Peniel. Now he was seeing the face of God again, reflected in his brother's forgiveness. The divine mercy showing itself through human grace. This is what reconciliation looks like. This is what it means when God heals what we've broken. This is the image of God restored between people who were enemies. Esau urged Jacob to journey with him to Seir, offering to travel alongside him with his 400 men as an escort rather than an army. But Jacob, still cautious, perhaps still healing from his night of wrestling, perhaps simply wise about managing the reunion, declined gently. "My Lord knows that the children are tender, and that I must care for the ewes and cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the flocks and herds before me, and the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." They parted peacefully, with promises to meet again in Seir. That meeting never happened, as far as we know from Scripture. The brothers would not see each other again until many years later, when they stood together at their father Isaac's grave to bury him. But the hatred was gone. The murder vow was forgotten. The brothers had made peace, and Jacob had faced his past and survived, not through deception or manipulation, but through humility, through God's grace, through the transformation that came from wrestling with the divine. Jacob traveled to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. Then he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought the plot of ground where he pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. El Elohe Israel. God, the God of Israel. Not El Elohe Jacob, not the God of the deceiver, but the God of Israel, the God of the one who wrestled with him and was transformed. Jacob had finally come home. Not just to Canaan, but to his true identity. Not just to the physical land of promise, but to the spiritual reality of who God had made him to be. But life was not finished teaching him. More trials lay ahead. More consequences of old decisions would come home to roost. More painful lessons about favoritism and its costs. His daughter Dinah was raped by Shechem, the son of Hamor, and Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi took terrible revenge, slaughtering every male in the city. Jacob's response revealed his continuing weakness. He was more concerned about his reputation among the Canaanites than about justice for his daughter. God told Jacob to go up to Bethel and settle there, to make an altar to the God who appeared to him when he was fleeing from Esau. Before going, Jacob had his household put away the foreign gods they were carrying, including perhaps the idols Rachel had stolen from Laban. They gave them to Jacob, and he buried them under the oak at Shechem. At Bethel, God appeared to Jacob again and blessed him, confirming his new name. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." And God reaffirmed the covenant promises, the land, the descendants, the nations that would come from him. Then came the greatest personal blow. They set out from Bethel, and while they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she had great difficulty. As she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't despair, for you have another son." But Rachel was dying. With her last breath, she named him Ben-Oni, which means son of my trouble. But Jacob renamed him Benjamin, son of my right hand. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Jacob buried his beloved wife, the woman he'd worked 14 years to marry, the woman he'd loved more than any other. Her death must have torn something in him that never fully healed. Then came another betrayal. His firstborn son Reuben slept with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine, Rachel's servant. When Jacob heard of it, he said nothing at the time, but he would remember it. Years later, on his deathbed, he would strip Reuben of his birthright because of this violation. The patterns of deception and betrayal and favoritism continued, poisoning the next generation as they had poisoned Jacob's. Jacob favored Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, above all his other sons. He made him an ornate robe, a coat of many colors, and the other sons burned with jealousy. Joseph, young and foolish, told his brothers about dreams he'd had, dreams where his brothers bowed down to him and their hatred grew murderous. One day, when Joseph was 17, Jacob sent him to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks at Shechem. The brothers saw him coming from a distance, and they plotted to kill him. Reuben talked them out of murder, suggesting they throw Joseph into a cistern instead. But while Reuben was away, Judah suggested they sell Joseph to passing merchants. They sold their own brother into slavery for 20 shekels of silver. Then they took Joseph's robe, the special robe their father had made for him, and dipped it in goat's blood. They brought it back to Jacob. "We found this," they said. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it at once. "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." For 22 years, Jacob believed Joseph was dead. For 22 years, he mourned his favorite son. For 22 years, he lived with that grief, that wound that never healed. He had no way of knowing that God was working, that Joseph was alive in Egypt, that Joseph was rising through slavery to imprisonment to the right hand of Pharaoh himself, that Joseph was being positioned by divine providence to save his entire family from starvation. Jacob was learning that God's ways are not our ways, that God can work through even the worst human evil to accomplish his purposes, that the Joseph he thought was dead was actually being prepared to save them all. When famine struck Canaan, Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. He sent his sons there to buy food, holding back only Benjamin, Rachel's other son, fearing to lose him too. The brothers went to Egypt and bowed before the governor, not recognizing that this powerful Egyptian was their brother Joseph. Joseph recognized them immediately, but he tested them, putting them through trials to see if they had changed, if they would abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him. Finally, Joseph revealed himself. The scene was overwhelming. Joseph wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still living?" But his brothers were terrified and could not answer him, so dumbfounded were they at his presence. Joseph said to them, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." The brothers returned to Canaan with the news. "Your son Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. His heart grew numb. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "I'm convinced," Israel said. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So Israel set out with all that was his. When he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night. "Jacob, Jacob," he said. "Here I am," Jacob replied. "I am God, the God of your father," he said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." So Jacob went down to Egypt with his entire family, 70 people in all. And when Joseph heard that his father was near, he had his chariot made ready and went up to meet his father Israel in Goshen. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. He blessed Pharaoh. He blessed his grandsons. He lived to see Joseph's children and held his great-grandchildren. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." "I will do as you say," Joseph replied. "Swear to me," Jacob insisted. So Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Sometime later, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took his 2 sons Manasseh and Ephraim along with him. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to you," Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Jacob blessed Joseph's sons, but he did something deliberate and purposeful. He crossed his hands, putting his right hand on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, though he was the firstborn. When Joseph saw this, he was displeased and tried to move his father's hands to put the right hand on Manasseh's head. But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. Manasseh too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." The pattern continued. The younger blessed above the older. But this time, it wasn't through deception or manipulation. It was through prophetic insight, through God's sovereign choice being exercised with wisdom rather than cunning. Jacob had learned. He understood now that God's ways transcend human custom, that divine election operates by grace, not by birth order, that God's purposes are accomplished not through our manipulation, but through his sovereignty. Then Jacob called for all his sons and said, "Gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come." And he prophesied over all 12 sons, speaking into the future of the 12 tribes that would come from them. To Reuben, he spoke of his instability and the consequences of his sin with Bilhah. "Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." To Simeon and Levi, he condemned their violence at Shechem. "Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council, let me not join their assembly, for they have killed men in their anger. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel." But to Judah, he gave the messianic blessing, the promise that would define the future of Israel and ultimately the world. "Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. That prophecy would echo through the centuries. King David would come from Judah. The line of kings would flow through Judah. And one day, more than 1,000 years after Jacob spoke these words, in the town of Bethlehem where Rachel was buried, a descendant of Judah would be born. Jesus Christ, the Lion of Judah, the true Israel who would perfectly fulfill everything Jacob's life pointed toward, the one who would wrestle with the powers of darkness and win, the one who would be broken on a cross and rise victorious, the one whose wounds would bring healing to the world. Jacob blessed each of his sons according to their character and destiny. Then he gave them his final instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried, there Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried, and there I buried Leah. Even in death, his faith was in God's promise. He wanted to be buried not in Egypt, where he'd found safety and provision, but in Canaan, the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and to him. Even in death, he was declaring that the future belonged not to Egypt, but to the promise. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. When the days of mourning had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's court. If I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father. Then I will return. Pharaoh agreed, and a great procession went up from Egypt to Canaan. Joseph, all Pharaoh's officials, the dignitaries of his court, all the members of Joseph's household, his brothers, and those belonging to his father's household. Chariots and horsemen also went up with them. It was a very large company. They carried Jacob's body to Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, just as he had requested. There, in the tomb Abraham had purchased centuries before, Jacob was laid to rest beside his fathers. Beside Abraham and Sarah, the beginning of the covenant. Beside Isaac and Rebekah, the continuation of the promise. Beside Leah, the wife he had never loved as he should have. His body was in the ground, but his legacy was alive in 12 sons, 70 descendants who would multiply in Egypt and become a great nation, who would be enslaved and delivered, who would receive the law at Sinai and enter the promised land, who would produce kings and prophets and priests, who would preserve the knowledge of the one true God through centuries of persecution and exile, and who would, in the fullness of time, bring forth the Messiah, the one who would bless all nations of the earth just as God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob so many centuries before. So what does this ancient story mean for us today, thousands of years after that night at the Jabbok River? Jacob's journey is the journey of every human soul toward God. We are all born grasping. From our first moments, we reach for what we want, what we think we need, what we believe will make us happy. We manipulate situations to our advantage. We scheme and plan and work angles. We try to secure our future through our own cleverness, our own strength, our own ability to control outcomes. And sometimes, like Jacob, we succeed. We get the promotion. We win the competition. We secure the relationship. We accumulate the wealth. We achieve the goal we'd been striving for. But the victories ring hollow. The blessings we've grasped slip through our fingers. The relationships we've manipulated fracture under the weight of our deception. We find ourselves running from consequences we never anticipated, estranged from people we love, carrying guilt we can't shake. We discover what Jacob discovered. You cannot build God's purposes on human manipulation. You cannot scheme your way to genuine blessing. You cannot grab hold of grace. It can only be received as a gift. And we all eventually must come to the end of ourselves. That night at Peniel wasn't just about Jacob. It was about what it means to truly encounter God, about what happens when human effort collides with divine purpose, about the transformation that comes not through our strength but through our breaking. God could have overpowered Jacob instantly. One touch dislocated his hip. One word could have destroyed him completely. But God wrestled with him all night long, allowing the struggle to continue for hours, letting Jacob exhaust every ounce of his own strength. Why? Because God wanted Jacob to come to the absolute end of his own resources, to realize that he could not win this fight, could not manipulate this opponent, could not scheme his way to victory, that his lifetime of cunning and cleverness meant nothing in the presence of the divine. Only when Jacob was broken, hip dislocated, strength gone, every human resource exhausted, could the real transformation happen. Only when he stopped wrestling and started clinging. Only when he moved from fighting to holding on for dear life. Only when he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me," acknowledging that blessing comes not from taking, but from receiving. Sometimes God's greatest blessings come wrapped in our greatest breaking. Sometimes the limp is the blessing. Jacob walked with that limp for the rest of his life. Every step was a reminder. Every pain was a sermon preached to his own soul. This is what it costs to be transformed. This is what it means to have encountered God and survived. This is the price of moving from Jacob to Israel, from deceiver to prince with God. But he also walked with a new name, Israel, prince with God. One who struggles with God and prevails, not by defeating God, but by surrendering to Him. The wound and the honor went together. The breaking and the blessing were inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. This pattern echoes throughout Scripture, throughout history, throughout every authentic spiritual journey. Moses was a murderer who fled to the desert, and God met him at a burning bush and made him the deliverer of Israel. David was an adulterer and murderer who wrote, "Create in me a pure heart, O God." And God called him a man after his own heart. Peter denied Christ 3 times, swearing he didn't know him, and Christ restored him and made him the rock on which he would build his church. Paul persecuted Christians, dragging them from their homes to be imprisoned and killed, and Christ knocked him off his horse on the Damascus road and made him the greatest missionary in history. God specializes in taking Jacobs and making them Israels, in taking broken, scheming, manipulative, guilty people and transforming them through grace into vessels of His purpose. Because that's what grace does. It doesn't wait for us to become worthy. It doesn't require us to clean ourselves up first. It meets us in our deception, our guilt, our brokenness, and it wrestles with us until we surrender. And ultimately, Jacob's story points us to Jesus Christ, the true Israel, the perfect Son of God who succeeded where Jacob failed. Jesus never deceived anyone, never manipulated a situation, never schemed to secure a blessing He didn't deserve. He trusted the Father perfectly, obeyed completely, loved without condition. But Jesus also wrestled, not with a mysterious man by a river, but with the will of God in another garden, Gethsemane. There, knowing the cross awaited Him, knowing He would bear the sins of the world, knowing He would experience the full weight of divine wrath against evil, Jesus prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Jesus wrestled with the hardest thing any human could face, and He chose surrender. He chose obedience. He chose to be broken for us. And unlike Jacob, whose breaking was for his own transformation, Jesus was broken for ours. His wounds brought our healing. His death brought our life. His resurrection brought our hope. Jesus is the ultimate Israel, the one who perfectly embodies what it means to struggle with God and humans and overcome, not by defeating them, but by loving them unto death. And because of Jesus, we don't have to wrestle alone. The one who overcame can give us his victory. The one who was broken can heal our brokenness. The one who rose can raise us to new life. So here is the question Jacob's story asks each of us. Are you still wrestling in your own strength? Still grasping, scheming, trying to secure your own blessing through manipulation and control? Or are you willing to wrestle with God until He breaks and remakes you? Are you willing to be wounded if it means being healed? To walk with a limp if it means walking with a new name? To lose your life if it means finding it in Christ? Jacob discovered something that night by the river that changed everything. God wasn't wrestling against him. God was wrestling for him, fighting to transform him, struggling to break through his defenses and his schemes to reach the real man underneath and remake him. God wanted Jacob to stop running, to stop manipulating, to stop trying to author his own story, to surrender, to trust, to hold on to God and refuse to let go until the blessing came. And when Jacob, broken and exhausted, finally whispered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me," he found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not a stolen blessing that could be taken away, not a manipulated inheritance that would crumble under scrutiny, but the genuine, unearned, overwhelming grace of God that could never be lost because it was never earned in the first place. The sun rose on a new man that morning. Not because Jacob won the wrestling match, he lost. Completely. Utterly. His hip was dislocated, his strength was gone, his ability to fight was destroyed. But in losing, he gained everything. That's the paradox of grace. That's the mystery of the gospel. We win by losing. We gain by surrendering. We live by dying. We become strong by becoming weak. Jacob's God is still wrestling with people today, still pursuing the manipulators and the schemers, still chasing down those who run from their past, still appearing in the darkness to those who think they're alone, still asking, "What is your name?" Still requiring us to confess who we really are beneath all our pretenses and schemes, still breaking what needs to be broken, still dislocating the hip of our self-sufficiency so we'll stop wrestling and start clinging, still giving new names to those who surrender, still transforming Jacobs into Israels. Because of Jesus, the ultimate Israel, we don't have to earn this transformation. We don't have to work 14 years for it. We don't have to scheme our way into it. We simply have to receive it, to stop fighting and start holding on, to say, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Somewhere in your life, there's a Jabbok River, a place where you must face yourself, face your past, face the consequences of your choices, face your God. A place where your human strength will finally fail, and you'll be left with only one choice. Hold on to God and refuse to let go until He blesses you. The question is, will you cross that river? Will you face that darkness? Will you wrestle until dawn? Will you surrender to the breaking that leads to blessing? Jacob did, and he was never the same. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life, yes, but he also walked with a new name, a new identity, a new relationship with God. He walked as Israel, prince with God, and if you will surrender, if you will stop trying to manipulate your way to blessing, if you will cling to God in your brokenness and say, "I will not let you go unless you bless me," you will walk as a child of God, transformed, redeemed, made new. The deceiver will die, and the beloved will be born. Neither will you ever be the same.